I think an offhand comment from Masahiro Sakurai probably sets the expectation for the next Nintendo Direct date, and the date reveal for Kirby Air Riders certainly goes a long way to building a picture of where the next 5 months are heading for Switch and Switch 2 releases. In this video, I'm going to talk about game scheduling, the next Direct, including a fairly detailed sketching out of what I think could actually be in it, based on some research into those producers and development teams who have been out of the limelight for some time, and explain why I now think a Direct in the next few weeks is much more likely, apart from the Mario Direct, which I still expect to be coming in the next couple of weeks. So let's start by quickly looking at the schedule. With Sakurai's unique brand of calmness, enthusiasm, dedication, and the odd twist of humour, he has set out everything to expect in Kirby Air Riders, apart from a few surprises, and I'm hugely excited to see the final game. This also puts another confirmed date on the table, and it's the pre-Thanksgiving slot, the 20th of November, building on the already confirmed 16th of October for Pokemon Legends ZA. I would say there's a 90% chance that there is a title of some kind between Legends ZA and Air Riders. 5 weeks is a standard gap for the rest of the year, but a massive gap in the holiday window. It's unlike Nintendo to have just 2 weeks between bigger releases, but far from unprecedented during the quarter of the year that includes Christmas, and I think there's a very good chance that a franchise with a different audience profile could take that middle slot, specifically Metroid Prime 4. I've got another video talking about this coming up, but I think there's an interesting symmetry in the way that Nintendo have been using both Metroid and Kirby over the last decade, and if Kirby can bring in younger and more Japanese-centric players to their Switch 2 audience, and Metroid Prime 4 can bring in slightly older and more Western-facing people, then these two games could be perfect complements during a packed holiday window. I've also mentioned before that Metroid Prime 4 seems ideal for the 30th of October to get that pre-Halloween vibe game that Bayonetta and Luigi's Mansion 3 have done for Nintendo in previous years, although I could also see the 7th of November working, as they generally like bigger titles to have a slightly longer run afterwards, and Pokemon Legends is certainly the biggest title currently on the slate. Of course, there are other options. We could see no major new games, but rather a Nintendo Switch 2 edition, perhaps with a Plus game. This would allow Metroid Prime 4 to slide into the December slot, either the 4th or the 11th. In some respects, I think this would make some sense, given that the game doesn't necessarily have an audience who would get it in a stocking as opposed to buying it themselves. With the obvious exception of Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which was in December, I suspect, because it needed work right until the final moment, Nintendo's December games are often more on the niche side. Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Advance Wars 1 Plus 2 Reboot Camp as originally planned before the delay, Big Brain Academy, and so on. I really think it's a 90% chance that there will be some kind of December title this year, possibly a Nintendo Switch 2 title like Pikmin 4, but likely something original, and in this case Metroid Prime 4 would be a decent shout. My guess, therefore, is that this will leave the 18th of September and the 2nd of October as the Mario slots, to be penciled in with a forthcoming Nintendo Direct focused on Mario, with potentially another title somewhere in September, perhaps as a downloadable only shadow drop. We already have Hello Mario in the next week, and I mean on top of that game. However, I have a very substantial video coming up about the Mario anniversary, so I will leave details about that for that particular video. As for Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment, it remains a good shout for December, but I'm actually now leaning 50% towards it being a 2026 game. Why? Well, Sakurai ended with a tease for a further update, and I don't think this update will be in another Air Riders specific Direct. That might seem to be overkill for even Kirby. The only venue, therefore, that would work for this would be a general Direct, which means that I now think it's 70% likely we will see another Direct before the end of this calendar year. I'd say that one would best fit before the end of October, around the time that a lot of people start renewing their Nintendo Switch Online subscriptions, although it could release earlier, of course, and there is a great tradition of September Directs in recent years. My own personal hunch is that there's a small but decent chance, let's say 30%, that we will see a Metroid Prime 4 dedicated direct, and if we do, then before the end of August and probably even Tuesday of next week would be an ideal slot, continuing the steady drumbeat of reveals over the last week or so. The Hello Mario release window next Thursday is unlikely to have too much of an audience overlap with a Metroid Prime showcase, although of course there's a decent chance that the Mario presentation could go on that date as an effective shadow drop. That's one for the Mario video. Of course, we also have Kirby coming up pretty soon, but as I say, I do think that Metroid Prime and Kirby have sufficiently different enough audience profiles that both can coexist, and there is some precedent of Metroid eating Kirby's hype lunch money in the fact that Metroid Prime Remastered dropped right in the hype window for Kirby Return to Dreamland Deluxe back in February of 2023. So, if Nintendo do release a new Direct in the coming period, what can we expect? If we assume that Hyrule Warriors Age of Imprisonment is pushed back to January and that there'll be a Mario title in March or February, then we're probably looking at new reveals for December, February, March, 30% some kind of shadow drop, and 70% something past March 2026, as they usually like to start to sketch out their future plans, even if they're reluctant to commit to anything too long term. Any of these slots could be for already announced titles, of course, but I actually think that these may be as well as, rather than instead of, titles in these slots if they're going for a big direct at this point, given the need to have a constant flow of announcements. I was corrected on a previous video that Splatoon Raiders in fact hasn't already been rated, but it still feels likely to me that they will have it relatively soon, because I feel like they wouldn't have teased it if they didn't want to come back to it again within the year. Both Raiders and Tomodachi Life would make a decent March game, but then again, I also think that the casual-focused nature of Tomodachi is perfect for the normal May slot, where they very often have hyper-casual games. What games are likely then in this next window of time? Certainly things I've discussed before. I feel like a drop for the playtest game may well suit them, for example. But beyond that, let's look down the list of studios who are due a non-Mario game drop, the assumption being that the next 6 months or so of Mario will be accorded its own direct to discuss. So, a new Switch sports or fitness game would be a huge seller, and I think both are actually overdue, and both have producers who are likely to be working on them, but it seems the wrong time to announce these just yet. They need a more established Switch 2 base, I think. Also, while WarioWare is always a good shout, and I have noted before the possibility, given the Switch's focus and its late life on games involving a mass of players, that they could drop a WarioWare, but this feels more like a holiday title, and I think they've probably maxed out their 2025 games pretty much for now. It's not impossible for 2025, as in the past Nintendo have released and revealed games quite late on, but it feels like more of a 2026 shout at this point, and I don't think there's any need to announce WarioWare that far in advance. Then again, I could see something short notice return, such as a Sing Party title, the Wii U karaoke game coming back. Something from EPT4, in fact, being announced feels like a 30% shout, as they often have quite a number of games, and particularly around the Switch 2's first major year on the market, it would be prudent to have more from them. We're also a long way overdue for a new Camelot title. I thought there was a slim chance that we could see a Golden Sun game as one of the final franchises to be revived by the Switch during a last-ditch Switch 1 Direct. I was right about the Switch 1 Direct, which came in March, but I was wrong about the resurrections. Instead of Golden Sun, we got Rhythm Heaven and Tomodachi Life. All that said, it's very tricky with Nintendo focusing so much on rehabilitating Switch games for the new system to see where Camelot could go. And while I think there's some kind of multi-sports game like Mario Sports Superstars in the wings, and this may solve a lot of problems, there's also the risk that this just cannibalizes sales from Mario Tennis Aces and Mario Golf Super Rush, which they're unlikely to want to do ahead of the movie, since the movie is likely to spur casual players who might pick up these titles. Given a sports game will be a June release, most likely I suspect that such a game would be a 2026 announcement if it existed at all. However, I still think Golden Sun can't be ruled out, simply because Camelot haven't done anything besides golf, tennis and Golden Sun in the last quarter century. At this point, I feel like there's a 10% chance the next Direct will show us a new Golden Sun, but 30% there'll be a new Mario sports title for June 2026. I don't expect more Kirby or more Pokemon, as Pokemon has a presentation in February. Of course, I think we could see more about Kirby Air Riders, but that's something separate. I think Pikmin could be represented by Pikmin 4 Nintendo Switch 2 edition with an expansion pack probably developed with the support of Eighting, but some kind of Pikmin spin-off is also plausible as a way to raise the profile of the franchise. I would give 30% to a Pikmin cameo in the new Direct, although I think we will see more from Pikmin in the coming year. Monolith Soft seems less likely for a new title, except that Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition seems so underloved without a Nintendo Switch 2 edition to its name. I don't expect Monolith Soft to necessarily give the Nintendo Switch 2 edition treatment to all their Switch titles. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 especially feels like it's bound for a full-fat definitive edition sometime around 2030, but X really does deserve it. I'd give 30% as a chance for Monolith Soft getting some kind of mention and probably just a bit of graphical updating for X, but who knows? An expansion to the original Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition might also be a way to draw new Switch 2 owners into that game, which, due to its well-deserved legendary reputation, is probably the best shop window title for Monolith Soft as a company. Still, this isn't shaping up to be a Direct with a major reveal just yet. For that, I think there are 3 teams that I feel are quite promising. The first group is Intelligent Systems' Fire Emblem team. Nintendo has really put in a lot of effort to make sure that their heavy-hitting franchises are very well represented at the dawn of Switch 2. Between originals and Nintendo Switch 2 editions, we have Mario, Donkey Kong, Zelda, Kirby, Metroid and Pokemon all in the first 6 months. Fire Emblem would fit this bill very well indeed, and I think there's a 50% chance that we will see a new Fire Emblem announcement by the end of the financial year, although whether it's in this Direct, I'm not quite so sure. Fire Emblem Engage didn't seem to do that well in the January slot during 2023, but April to June has often been a favourable time for the franchise before, and Three Houses only slipped out of that window due to delays. The second group is EPT9. Yes, I know, the Mario Kart team only just got done giving us Mario Kart World, but they actually quite frequently release 2 titles at a system's launch. They did this for the 3DS and for the Switch. Now, I don't think this will be ARMS 2. I do think ARMS 2 is eventually coming, but the key directors on that game were all heavily wrapped up with work on Mario Kart World, so it would not be an obvious fit unless they completed World perhaps in 2023 and have been working on ARMS ever since. Personally, even then, I hope that they will spend the time to make this a far bigger experience than the first ARMS game, which I loved, but was a little undernourished. However, there is a senior EPT9 figure who is missing from the Mario Kart World credits, except for a special thanks, and that is Yasuyuki Oyagi. Oyagi was heavily involved with the Booster Course Pass, but I don't think that took him 9 years. He has a history with the Nintendogs franchise as the director of Nintendogs Plus Cats, and he is also one of the incredibly small number of people to have worked on some franchises that would be huge if they were to return. He was the assistant director and responsible for course design on F-Zero X, was the co-director of Pilot Wings, designed courses for Star Fox 64, and even worked on both Star Tropics titles in the 90s. Under normal circumstances, I wouldn't expect this to matter very much in terms of what Oyagi might do next, but I do think Nintendo has something of a time pressure to try to revive these old franchises before their senior people retire and can no longer pass on that deep understanding of what made the original games work. This may not be important to every company, but I think understanding the irreducible DNA of a game series is very important to Nintendo. I think it 50% likely we will see an Ayagi credited game release by the end of 2027, and if we do, I think it's a very open field as to what that could possibly be. Another Nintendogs probably leads the field, and something brand new also feels likely, but I wouldn't rule out entirely something F-Zero given the prominence Nintendo has put on the franchise with F-Zero 99 and the day one launch of F-Zero GX on Switch 2. Pilot Wings is a lesser shout, but not impossible. The only one I probably would rule out is Star Tropics. Sorry, Star Tropics. But I don't necessarily think Ayagi is the only route to another EPT9 game. Kosuke Ibuki is more than capable of having an additional team, given how important EPT9 has become to Nintendo, and in this case, I would expect it to be something original. Not necessarily huge, a Dragon Drive-sized title can't be ruled out, but I'd say there's a 50% chance we will see something else from Ibuki by the end of 2027 at least, and of course, there's a decent chance it could be shown here and now. I also noted in my 2024 review of the Paper Mario the Thousand Year Door credits that there was a fairly substantial chunk of Intelligent Systems staff who weren't on the Thousand Year Door or on 2023's WarioWare Move It, but were on previous games. Perhaps they had an exodus from the company, but I think it's plausible that they were dedicating staff to another project. Now, Intelligent Systems has in the past been quite innovative, but in recent years they've tended to focus on the same few franchises. Pushmo feels like an obvious one for a resurrection, especially since there was a Wii U Pushmo game that could be expanded for the Switch 2. Obviously, the absolute dream scenario would be that they're working on another Advance Wars title, but the Advance Wars series was mostly shepherded by the Fire Emblem side of the company, so if not Pushmo, my guess is that it could be something brand new. Therefore, I'd give a 30% shout to some kind of Intelligent Systems announcement between Fire Emblem or something else during this presentation. One other thing that's worth a shot, and this is me going back on what I've said before, but I've noticed something which has made me change my mind quite a bit. I think there is a significant chance that there will be a new Wario Land that's potentially been in development for about 4 or 5 years. A video exploring why that is will be up soon, or catch a preview on Patreon in the meantime. So look, if they launched a late September or October direct based on all of this, it would be pretty cool. A Shadow Drop playtest game and announcements for Fire Emblem, Pushmo, plus either Wario Land or a new EPT9 game, Nintendo Switch 2 editions for Pikmin 4 and Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition, likely some GameCube news, and a Sakurai update for Kirby Air Riders. However, if they really wanted to gild the lily, there is an obvious announcement. Not 3D Mario, that seems destined for a Mario Direct if it's ready, but a major Zelda title, and probably an Ocarina of Time remake. All things considered, I'm not sure I see the value to Nintendo of announcing such a title now when they could make a much bigger splash next year. Unless it's releasing in March, it's unlikely to move the dial too much this financial year, and they need to keep something with massive hype potential for early next year to keep up that vital momentum. That said, I do think an Ocarina of Time remake is likely for either this year or next for reasons I've covered separately, and if 3D Mario and Pokemon take the October and November slots in 2026, then either July 2026 or March 2027, right before the movie, would feel like the next likeliest places to position this kind of a major title. I also think it's worth erring on the side of caution as a rule, because directs often underdeliver compared to expectations, and if Nintendo are committing to a big showing now, then they will have a little less leeway for shock and awe in the new year, and I think they will want to save some things for that window. Even so, I'm confident that there's some very exciting content to look forward to. For now, though, I'm going to wrap up this video. Check out more of some of the specifics for things I've delved into through these links on screen. Thanks so much as ever for watching, and I will look forward to seeing you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.